Hello, today I'm going to be working on a much larger scale than I have been recently. I've got quite an ambitious little still life setup here, and I'm using an angle poise lamp to create some dramatic light. I've got a glass of brandy there which catches the light beautifully, as well as the silver tankard and flowers that I've painted before, and some china here as well. I've also got some twiglets which are quite hard to resist, but I'm doing okay so far. I've had one or two, but I've got to leave the rest alone, and they're very tempting. Anyway, I've also got them on a checkerboard, so it's going to give me quite an interesting and dramatic backdrop for the objects here. It's quite useful to use the angle poise lamp because it's a very, very grey winter's day outside, and I'm not going to get much daylight in the afternoon now, so this light will remain constant while I work, so if I have to work into the evening I can. This paper has been primed with some pale umber acrylic paint, which helps to seal the paper so that it doesn't draw the water out of my paint, my acrylic paint that I'm going to use today. And it also provides a nice warm tone to paint onto, so any gaps that I leave won't be white empty voids. They'll have this colour in them, which is quite good, and it seems to go with lots of other things. I will be using quite a simple palette, which I'll show you in a minute, as well as some slow drying medium, which helps the paint to flow. One of the big things to think of when you scale up your work is to also scale up your brushes. So I've got decorators brushes here, so several different sizes, and I'm going to try and use those as I work, because I want this painting to remain big and gestural. Obviously, you know, with a normal size brush, these marks are going to be much smaller in relation to this piece of paper and to this scale. So I want to keep the brush marks big. The beauty of working large and standing up to work is that your arm movements can be much more broad. There's much more movement, freedom of movement when you're standing up. So it should be quite exciting, and I'm hoping quite dynamic too. Okay, I'll talk you through how I start. Okay, on my palette here, I've got titanium white, cadmium yellow, alizarin red, cadmium red, French ultramarine blue and lamp black, and some of the slow drying medium. So it's a fairly limited palette, but I'm hoping that that will make it kind of simpler, all of this. Also, I've put lots of paint out because obviously it's a bigger piece of work, but I haven't put out so much that it's going to be drying on the palette as I work, so I'll have to top this up as I go. The first thing I'm going to do is just sketch out where these objects are going to sit on here. I'm going to use some black. I'm going to just use watery paint. The best effects that you get with acrylics, they kind of work best if you don't add water to them. It tends to make the paint go dull, and you don't get the best of the colours. But for starting off, for underpainting, I think it's fine to do that because it makes the paint run and you want to work quickly at this stage. So I'm just trying to visualise where these elements are going to go. never easy knowing when to stop a painting. I think as a good rule of thumb, it's a good idea to stop when you're looking for things to do, when you're holding a brush full of paint and you're not quite sure where to put it. And I think I've reached that point. There's no more to do on here, and I'm quite happy with what I've got. It's doing what I set out to do, so that's fine, and I'm going to stop there. Well, good morning. I'm back here again because I looked at this in daylight and decided that I really wasn't happy with it. So I'm going to film myself making some radical changes to this and let you see how I turn this from a very shouty kind of painting into something I hope that's a little bit more subtle. What I've done here, I've taken the checkerboard out of the equation. I've actually turned the board over onto its plain side. And I've also put a cloth onto the board as well because I wanted to just simplify everything. These objects really are the stars of this painting, and I think that the contrast between the squares on the checkerboard is just drawing the eye too much. So I'm going to try and change this now. I use the same palette as I was using yesterday, and hopefully bring this together, and you can watch me do it all. Okay, see you later. Fingers crossed. I just wanted you to see the setup. Obviously it's morning now, so I've got the skylight open, and that's obviously softening all the shadows in this still life. I'm going to close the skylight, and you'll see how much more dramatic that all becomes under the lamplight. So it's important to think about the lighting that you have, what you can do with the lighting in your environment before you start painting. So now this is much more similar to how I had it last night, and as you can see it looks a lot less yellow now that I've turned the checkerboard over, so this should be interesting. So I want to simplify and kind of regain some of the textures in the foreground. It's interesting to see what's happening here, so I'm squinting at this and I know, just warm that slightly, that this is now, obviously I've put a white cloth here instead, so I can put some light in here now. You can see that, yeah. So large brush, very dry paint, bit of slow drying medium in there. And obviously everything that was being reflected by the onto the glass and the metal and everything, you know, that was picking up the colours of the checkerboard will all need adjusting a bit, but I do want to keep this lively. I ate the twiglets from yesterday, so I've had to put new twiglets out, and I shall try and resist eating these, at least while I'm painting. There's a kind of blueness. I want to get some really nice neutral kind of greys, mixing ultramarine, blue, black and white here to try and just get some cooler greys. I think all this colour needs some kind of foil, something sort of quiet. So you need some quiet areas in the painting. I've got to put this on fairly thick to cover the underpainting. But I hope that some neutral greyish colours will kind of enhance these colours. You know, when you've got colour all over everything like I had, there was no sort of focus to it. So I think by doing this, what I'm doing is really bringing the eye to the points of colour, and obviously there's light bouncing around, white reflections bouncing around all over the place now. It's amazing what you can do with white. It isn't just white. There's all sorts of, there's the cast warmth of the light coming from the lamp, and the shadows have this bluish grey quality. There's some warm light coming through here. It's a bit bright. I can soften that a little bit. Still important to squint and try and simplify things. Particularly when you're painting shadows and tones, you know, it's those relationships between. I'm just looking at the shadows coming from here. There's more of them up there too. Obviously the objects have moved a bit. It's not going to be quite like it was yesterday, but hopefully near enough that I can do this. It's a bit light really. I love the way you can layer acrylics. Because they dry so fast, you can just build and build and build, put one colour on top of another, and they just get better and better the more colour you put on, I think. There's some light through there too. A bit bright. There's some shadows coming off of the twiglets too. What I might do is get a flat brush and just emphasise the cloth a little bit with some flat brushwork here. There's because I don't want this to look like snow. There's a danger of all this whiteness just looking like white fluff. So it needs some kind of texture or suggestion of what this is, and the tablecloth has some creases going across it. I think if I pick out a few of those, it should just be a little bit more tableclothy and less like snow. Much happy with that already. Just need to make up some good greys to go. The white tablecloth is now reflecting up the side of the tankard here, and simplifying the colours that were there, so it's not warm and reddish like this. It's much more cool and grey now. And that colour's also changing, it's all changing inside this glass here too. So let's go across in that direction there. You can see it sort of going through the back. A glimpse of it here. And coming out that side, but obviously it's much darker on this side. And it almost sort of blends up with the wall behind. Need a little bit of darker. Still want to keep things fairly neutral at the back there. There is this sort of warm wood coming round. Just want to make sure that line works through the back of the objects here, but still keeping it fairly dull, using a bit of black and red, cadmium red, a bit of blue. Just keep it kind of cool and dark, sort of neutral in the background. And that then reflects up there. A lot of cloth in there. This bluishness to it. And there's light here too. And then get some shadows in the foreground. There's also a crease which is quite nice, gives a little bit of a three-dimensional feel to the fabric coming through. Shadows always have soft edges. If they get too hard, they start to look like a positive thing themselves. So quite a good point to get some soft brushwork in there, sort of over painting the edges where the shadow meets the light. It's a bit too white, just soften that slightly with some yellow. Just suggest the lamplight falling on it. There's a bit of pattern in this fabric. It's got a embroidery anglaise edge to it, which adds a little bit of interest here. How's it looking? So bright. Sometimes you can only really see how strong the colour is when you put it next to the others. There is a slight lightness here, but it's not a strong contrast because this side of the subject is so much further away from the lamp. This is where the lamplight is, so it's very intense and strong, but over this side it's softer light. And that's the same down here too. I'll hint at the shadows in the front, but I don't want to have too much contrast because I'll end up in the same situation as I was before, having too much interest lower down the painting. That's okay, just kind of nod to what's there. Just wondering if I've done what I need to do there. I think I'll reduce the amount of blue in the background here too. It's quite make up more of this just sort of dull greyish version of that back wall colour. Some of the slow drying medium in there, a little bit of yellow just to soften it. Trying to suggest the light. That's a bit bright, but it does need something in there because the lamplight is falling into this jug now. It's still a bit strong. There's a streak of bright light here, so I know whatever this light is that's in that space has to be quite warm to show up the twinkle of the light that's falling in there. So I do, that's not bad. And let's just deepen it a little bit more. Because the light seems more dramatic than it was yesterday. I think I've probably changed the angle of the light a little bit, of the lamp. There's a stronger feel of light and dark on this little jug now. Just appearing out of the gloom. Using a bit of artistic license here because it's not quite where it was last time, so just having to make that up a little bit. This is all very dark in here. Having to tip this towards the light to see what I've got, but these shadows are very dark, very close to these pots. A little bit of that fabric, the pattern on going off over the edge there. I think it just needs some highlights now and that will be done. So, not dealing with quite such a warm light as it seemed yesterday. There's some warmth. I've got a little bit of cadmium yellow in there, but on that edge there it's picking up. Just get my marl stick. This is very useful if you've got to do something really precise. This is a touch of highlight going in on this glass, probably a few other places too. And I don't want my hand to waver. And it's called a mild stick. It's got a ball on the end with chamois leather over it, so it doesn't scratch at the painting. And in theory, you can rest that on a dry part of the painting, and then rest your hand on that. You can actually use it for drawing down lines too, so it will support your hand in a straight direction. Just sliding your hand down the handle here, because it's straight, and it just gives your hand some support. But I rest it at the edge of the painting because sometimes I find it slides when I've got it on the actual canvas or paper that I'm using. But here I can just hook it at the top of the board and use it. It's almost like a bridge, so your hand rests on it above the work. It's called a marl stick. It's very useful. But you can make them out of scrap wood and stuff as well. So I just need little touches of light. I'm going to put some of the Stay Wet Medium in too, so it flows a little bit. Just gives a bit of sparkle to it all. That's definitely inside the glass. There's a very bright shine, but it's definitely got yellow in it too, because of the colour of the brandy. I'm letting the dry paint just scuff over it slightly. I quite like that broken texture in the dry paint. And this is very bright. I'm going to get a different brush for this, a flat brush. If I can. Oh yeah. It's a very bright streak of white in the silver here, where the light's sort of concentrating through the glass. And then there's a blue. There's blue reflecting on the glass too, and I think it's from the daylight perhaps coming around the edge of the lower window here. It carries on down there, but it's slightly softer here. That's quite good, that looks okay. And there's a warmth also, like a slightly warmer, peachier kind of colour, just running down that edge there. I'm going to put some of that on the twiglets too, because they catch the light too. Quite a nice way. And again, letting the brush be kind of dry and scuffy. Just a bit hit and miss in places, but it's kind of good for texture. And the same down here, so you can rest the marl stick against the side of the board too. I've put the lights on now, so obviously that helps me to see it a little bit better. And I am much happier to leave this now. It really has brought the whole painting together, and I'm really glad I came back to it too. I almost abandoned the whole idea, but I think it's got really a lovely chunky quality to it, which I really like. It's some robust painting in here. And I like the way that looks, but also I think the way the light is now falling on it, and this simplified surface down here where I've put the tablecloth has made much more of a focus of these elements here, and I think the colours look much richer. I hope you enjoyed that Thanks for watching. See you again. Bye bye.